The medical frump was deafened now, almost as loud as the helicopter rotters. Vroom, vroom, vroom. The sound demanding Mike return to full consciousness. Mike tried to get his eyes to zero in on whatever was causing the head-splitting sound. His eyes weren't fully cooperating, but they were giving him glimpses. Mike struggled to process what he was seeing. His head was pounding because the visual snatches were coming at him like they were being hit by a frog light. Mike saw a robotic arm suspended above his head, a bear mask peeled open, held by an arm, honed bits of metal inside the mask, like miniature but lethal knives in a constant motion. Mike's brain brought his sight completely back online, and Mike put it all together. He was lying on his back, on a hard metal surface, a recliner chair, and he was looking at the inside of a robotic mask, full of sharp, continually moving metal. The mask was coming towards his face. Mike yelped and tried to get up. That's when he realized he was bound to the chair. Steel bands were clamped around his wrists. A heavy leather strap was clamped tight around his chest. The metal juggernaut started to descend towards Mike's face. He did the only thing he could do. He brought every muscle he had into play and sent them all into motion. He squirmed and twisted and wriggled. He kicked his legs. He jolted his body up and down to side to side. Mike knew, of course, that his efforts were going to fail. He wasn't strong enough to break. Above the restless metal chair, Mike heard a clank, a discontinuous ping and crack. He knew the sound. The bolt was giving way. Mike felt his arm sway away from him as one of the chair's armrests detached. His gaze still on the plunging mask, Mike jerked his arm without much hope. To Mike's astonishment, the metal clamped dislodged from Mike's wrist. He held an arm free, but that wasn't enough. The mask was closer now. It was moving slowly, but untouchable, lower and lower. Sharp metal, soft face, not a good combination. Frantic, Mike sent his fingers to search for something, anything on the side of the chair that could help him get free. He ran his fingers over the expanse of the metal, thrust them between sharp gaps, and then Mike's fingers stopped at something flat and round, some kind of control button. Mike strained to see his hand, and he saw a quarter-sized green light. He didn't hesitate. He pushed the green button, and Eureka! The other wristband unclipped. The mask was now just inches from Mike's nose. It was so close that the burning of the rotation and constant cycle metal was blowing his hair. Furious in the crucial need to move, Mike fumbled with the leather jacket strap. Maybe because he got lucky, or maybe because necessity is the mother of everything to get the hell out of Dodge. Mike managed to click the strap apart and slide off the chair. His escape couldn't have been any later. The bits of metal grazed the side of his forehead as he turned downward. Mike dropped on the floor. Metal on metal screech told him the mask, aka buzzsaw, was grinding into the chair. Fireflies of hot sparks sheared at little hairs on Mike's arms as he rolled away from the chair. All of Mike's muscles demanded a break. He flopped into a gulp of exhaustion. The continuing spray of sparks and his understanding of his foul strength got Mike back into motion. He tried to stand. Fierce in pain, Mike's calf sent him curling off balance. He completely backward into gapping metal and stinking, crusty flux fur. Mike scuffled away from what was grabbing at him. His gaze shot around him wildly. He saw a litter of faded, matted fur covered animatronic characters. It's just costumes, Mike told himself. Again, he tried to stand. This time, ready for the pain. He made it, but as he wavered on his feet, he heard a particular familiar pop-pop beat of snaps. Looking down, he watched the costume clamp open. Mike squat and baggered backwards. His hand whipped to his nose and mouth as the stink stench of rotten corpse hit him. No longer thinking about running away, because his brain was now overwhelmed for what he was seeing and smelling. Mike's stomach threatened to heave as he gazed at the mutilated remains of 3 men and Max. Mike gagged as he looked at poor Max's body. It was severed in two. No, not severed. It looked like something had bit her in half at the waist. Her upper body laid back against one of the 2 men, and his lower body was strapped across her feet, her stomach. Mike, his hand over his mouth, quickly shifted his gaze to her face. Her eyes and mouth were wide open in the rickets of pure terror. "Oh, Max," Mike whispered. Mike jerked his eyes away from her. When he did, he saw the faces of one of the 2 men that stimulously drew all the way into the man's brain. Mike quickly moved his gaze to the other two men, one of the older and one of younger. Mike sucked in his breath. He recognized the younger man. It was Jeff, Max's brother. Jeff and the other guy looked like they were been run by a metal slicer, but no, the cuts weren't straight. They were curved, like the wounds you get from a pirate's hook. The last thought finally galvanized Mike. He turned away from the putrid canvas, and he limped past the still sparking mask of chair. He staggered toward the door. At the room's verbal, Mike paused, all the way up to down the main hallway. The lights were surging on and off. On and off. The rhythm wasn't even, though. It was chaotic, as if the lights were being manipulated by someone too enraged to stay in control. Mike squinted to see through the disorienting flashes of light and dark. It was hard to know for sure, but the hallway appeared to be empty. Mike reeled into the hall, his feet fumbling as if he never properly learned to walk. Mike zigged and zagged his way toward the lobby. If he could get there, he could get out of the building. One of the buildings meant salvation. Mike tried to pick up the pace. His feet shuffled faster, just a few feet from the lobby now. From behind Mike, a crash boomed after him. A roaring joint of crash, they pattered into the pursuit. Mike didn't bother to look back. He called on every ounce of his strength he had, and he stepped out the gas, managed to bring into a jerky gallop. He spilled into the lobby. He threw himself towards the double door, but when Mike hit the doors, they wouldn't open. They were locked. A new sound joined of crashing, roaring. No, not a sound. A voice. A singing voice. Dum-dum-dum-dum-dum-dum. The lights were now going totally bonkers. They were winking in and out so fast that it was impossible for Mike to see what was coming towards him. But something was. Something big. Something fast. Mike summoned every last bit of his persuasion. He pounded on the metal doors, sensing rather than seeing that this time has run out. Mike looked to his left. He screamed and fell in total eclipse of any light he had ever seen or hoped to see. Abby, curled up in her bed, hugged Dove tighter than she ever had, and it still wasn't tight enough. Outside Abby's window, the sun was a deep red ball hovering just above the hills of the distance. Soon it would slip out of sight. Abby thought the ball looked like a big drop of blood, like the sky was hurt and needed a bandage. Of course, Abby knew the sky wasn't hurt. She was hurt. But she wasn't hurt in a way the bandage could help. The bandage couldn't fix the stuff-up nose and the stinging eyes of hours of crying that had left her with. And it couldn't fix the fact that the happiness she's been feeling ever since she's been united with her friends at Freddy's had been ripped away. Abby's happy was gone. That was why she kept hugging Dove tighter and tighter and tighter. Hanging on to something familiar, something Abby loved, and who loved her, was the only thing that could stop her tears. Maybe, she hoped, it hadn't worked yet. A knock on the door caused Abby to smudge Dove even more. Abby put her face in Dove's gray-blue fur. "Abby, sweetheart?" her Aunt Jane called through the door. Abby let go of Dove with one arm, and she pulled the blanket over herself and the dolphin. Even though the blanket and the door could hear the TV in the living room, she heard it for hours. The stupid fake laughter coming from the TV told Abby that her Aunt Jane was watching old-timey sitcoms. "You can't stay in there forever, kiddo," Aunt Jane called. "Leave me alone," Abby shouted, her she sniffed again. Jane's expression inside came clearly from the door. "Suit yourself," she said. Abby could tell her Aunt Jane was annoyed, but who cared? She listened to the satisfaction as the tap-tap-tap of the dumb high heels her aunt always wore retreat from her door. Jane gave Abby closed door a long, shearing look. Spoiled brat. The obnoxious little twit wouldn't be acting like that much longer. Jane thought she strolled back into her nephew's ratty, pathetic living room. Living room. How could anyone possibly live in this sculpture? Jane sure couldn't. But she could tolerate for now. Jane had to kept her eye on the end goal. That was why she was here pretending to help. Oh, she was helping all right. Helping herself. Once Abby was in Jane's custody, Jane could be one step closer in getting control of the big, fat trust fund that should never have been Abby in the first place. Why Jane's father had to left the money to his granddaughter instead of his daughter was beyond John. She understood why he hadn't left it to Jane's brother. For one thing, he disappeared off the face of the earth after he left his family for another. He was an idiot. He never should have been married such a weak woman. Curling her lips at the couch sagging cushions, Jane flopped onto one of them, wriggling to try to create a comfortable position. She reached for the TV remote and made yet another attempt to find something decent to watch on the ridiculous old TV. Laying yet another sitcom. Jane heard an old, rarely sound crappy TV. Must be feedback, she thought. She turned up the volume so she could hear what was being said instead of hearing the static. Jane smoothed the crest of her pants. I'm going to have to get this pantsuit dry cleaned, she thought. Who knew what kind of parasites were living in the grumpy sofa cushions? A funny line of TV pulled a laugh from Jane. She shook her head at the antics of the screen, and Jane stopped mid-head shake. What was that? She caught a glimpse of a movement in the kitchen. Was Mike finally home? Jane turned to open her mouth, preparing to scolding her nephew deserved for expecting her to cool jets in. Jane dropped the remote. Half in shadow and half in a blood-red smear of the dusk light coming through the kitchen window, a giant bear stood next to Mac's fridge. It was just a few feet from Jane, and it was staring at her with radiant white eyes. Jane closed her eyes. I'm hallucinating, she thought. Just a little time in the drags of Mike's life, and she's already losing her. Jane opened her eyes again. No way. The bear was still there, and it was taking a step forward towards her. Still under her blanket, still hugging Doe, and crying even harder now. Abby went rigid with a big thud shook the house, so hard that Abby's bed jolted beneath her. Abby shoved back the blanket and sat up. What was that? She whispered to Dolph. Dolph had no answer, but he was there for support when Abby got out of her bed and hurried to the door. Laying her ear against the pane of wood, she listened. She heard nothing, except the TV. Since Abby has been buried under the covers, the red ball in the sky had disappeared. Now just a red sheen outlined the top of the hills. Abby could see the distance through her window. Night would have been here. Aunt Jane? Abby called. Abby didn't really want Aunt Jane, but she didn't feel right about ignoring the big bang. The only response Abby got was more of the fakey laughter from the TV. Abby frowned. She looked back towards her bed. Maybe she should just get back in bed. Abby listened to the door again. No, she had to know what was made that big thump. Abby reached for the doorknob, but then she hesitated. She backtracked to her desk so she could grab her drawing pads and some pencils. Abby always felt better when she had a pad and pencil in her pocket in her overalls, so she stuffed both in place. A bit more confident, Abby returned to her door and opened it. She peeked into the hallway, then hesitated. She walked down the hall towards the kitchen. It was empty. So Abby looked towards the living room. Where? Freddy? Abby's happy came back to her. The animatronic bear separated itself from the bloaty shadow from near the end of the sofa. As soon as it did, Abby could see she wasn't looking at Freddy. The bear looked like Freddy in every way, except for the one obvious difference. His fur wasn't brown. It was golden. The gold was almost like the color of a shirt Abby was still wearing in the maroons overall she put on in the morning. A golden Freddy. Wow, Abby said. She no longer cared about the miserable hours she just went through. Her eyes stopped stinging. She could breathe through her nose again. Who are... Abby stopped mid-question when the little boy with tousled blonde hair, the same color as the big robotic bear's fur, magically came out of the robot. Not Freddy, the blonde boy said. Abby stared in awe at the little boy. He looked just like an ordinary boy, but not exactly. The boy was kinda sparkly, and Abby could see through him. Just a wee bit. Abby thought the boy looked the way an angel might look. Abby gave a fairy tale-like boy a big smile. You came for me, she asked. The boy nodded. Everyone's waiting. It's time to go play. Abby squealed and clapped her hands. The blonde boy gave her a smile, even dissolved into a shimmer that went back into Golden Freddy. The big bear gestured at Abby to follow him as he took a giant step forward to the front door of the house. Abby looked at Dolph. She didn't want to risk losing him while she was playing with the others, so she sat the dolphin at the kitchen table. As she did, her gaze caught a glimpse of a light blue in the living room. Abby turned. On the floor, just out of behind the end of the sofa, the hem of Aunt Jane's pants was visible. Her aunt's feet, still in high heels, snuck out in pants. The heels seemed to be lying in a pool of something. Ketchup, maybe? How had her aunt spilled ketchup behind the sofa? Silly Jane, Golden Freddy said. The animatronic spoke in a little boy's voice. She fell asleep. Abby started to ask herself why Aunt Jane would sleep on the floor and spill ketchup. Then she shrugged. She didn't care what her aunt did. She turned and followed Golden Freddy out of the front door, closing it behind her. Golden Freddy trudged stiff at the little porch. Abby paused. She listened to the heavy footsteps. All the sun's red was gone. It was full-on night now. A dirt of the moon was hovering over the concrete side steam across the street, and the moon's light made a bear look like about to catch fire. It looked really cool. Abby gazed up and down the street. How do we get to Freddy's? She asked Golden Freddy. Golden Freddy cocked his head. One of his big white eyes blinked shut and then opened again in a slow-motion wink. his teeth flashing moonlight as he gave Abby a wide smile. The smile was more creepy jack-o'-lanterns than warm and friendly, but Golden Freddy couldn't help that. Abby knew the animatronics couldn't move and make expressions like normal kids. That was okay. Abby had never ridden in a taxi before, so she felt a fizz of excitement when she opened the shiny yellow back door and got into it. Taking a seat, she grinned at the fun, old country music playing on the radio. She looked at the back of the driver's head. All Abby could see around the driver's headrest was a curly brown sticking hair under the dirty baseball bat cap that looked like it'd been worn for thousands and thousands of days. The hair and the cap were bobbing to the twanging music. Abby shifted her gaze to the rearview mirror, and she saw crinkled green eyes looking back at her. The driver turned his head, and she noticed a toothpick sticking out between lips, stretching into a smiling smile. The driver's face then front again and asked, "Where to, little lady?" As Abby opened her mouth to answer the question, the other back seat door opened. The taxi settled low, really low, as Golden Freddy squeezed himself into the door and managed to sit next to Abby. "What the hell?" The driver spun around in his seat, jerking so much that he could hit his head on the roof of the taxi. He spit out his toothpick and let out a shriek. Abby smiled, but she didn't blame the driver for his reaction. He knew adults didn't understand. The driver's mouth hung open as she stared at Golden Freddy. Golden Freddy gave the driver one of his big grins. The driver turned around farther to look at Abby. She smiled at him sweetly. The driver shook his head and faced the front of the taxi again. "Not cool, man," he said. "Not cool." Abby disagreed. She thought riding in the taxi with Golden Freddy was very cool. Muttering something Abby couldn't make out, the driver took in a loud sound and then put the car in gear. "We want to go to the old Freddy Pizzeria, please," Abby said. The driver eyed Abby in the rear view. He shook his head. "Why do I always get the weirdos?" he asked.